Hello everybody, this is Johnny S with another R6 vlog. It's after work afternoon. We'll try to get and see if we can have enough time before the sun goes down. It's my usual problem that, you know, we don't have much time after work to do my logs. So I try to cramp up everything, but it is something that I do like talking about. It is one of my hobbies, let's say. So a little bit of information about me. My name is John, 44 years old, living in Greece, Athens. Grew up in Australia most of my life, and I am a father with a YouTube channel talking about bike content and not only. In today's topic, it's going to be a little bit more advanced as per usual. Usually my topics, I try to keep them as you know, simple, let's say, and for both beginners and advanced, but today's vision is going to be a little bit more advanced, let's say. We're going to talk about suspension in our motorcycles, understanding suspension, what each one of these suspension components means, how do they refer, can you adjust them or not, how do you adjust them, and so forth. I'm going to have a look and see if I can find a nice place where we can sit down a little bit relaxed with not many people, so that we can have some time to discuss this and better explain them. Okay, so as we go towards the place, I've got a place in mind. We've done many videos as such, but you know, it all depends whether people will be there or not. The way that I'm going to do the video, in order to keep it so short and simple, is I'm going to explain a little bit the different components, the terminology used. It's one of the topics that I'm no expert by no means. It's something that I have not gotten into myself a lot, because I do trust my mechanic and he has adjusted my settings, not only initially, but because I had mentioned previously my bike was for 6 years not moved, we did have to actually refurbish my suspension. So both the front forks and the rear shock, he had to take it apart, change the oil, change the seals. There was a lot of wear, let's say. You can imagine that. I mean, when I took the bike to the mechanic after the 6 years, I actually had to push it. All the oil had drained out of the front forks and the back, so it was just like heating, very dangerous. So the guy had to redo everything, you know what I mean? And after he did everything for me, he set it up. He told me that he went to the factory settings of the bike, making a little bit more road-wise, and he let me know how does it feel. And I gave my feedback. After a week, I told him it feels like that, like this. He did a couple of adjustments. He made it to what I liked, you know what I mean? So my bike now is pre-configured, let's say. Now, has he done these adjustments with me on top of the bike and so forth? No. Is there a possibility to actually change these and make them even better? Obviously, and I'll explain. But this is the reason why usually I have not gone into suspension, and it is, to some people, seems like a scary topic, including myself, you know what I mean? It's like, yeah, don't touch it, don't cause any problems, because it is very important, you know what I mean? If setting up your suspension is not done right, it can cause multiple issues, including the known to everybody death wobble, you know what I mean, the tank slappers, and it can cause many other problems also. So this is one of the reasons that I have never gotten into it. But lately, as one of a friendly YouTuber had mentioned in the chat, he mentioned somebody called Dave Moss, which is an American guy that's very expert. I have seen many videos of that guy and on some other YouTubers. So I've also talked about this with my mechanic just to see whether he agrees or not, and he told me that yeah, it sounds about right. So I have acquired quite a bit of knowledge on the subject, to the point that I can share with everybody, just to help out whoever is interested into it. Because what I did notice is that some of the points were not clearly explained. Some of the videos were for people that did know about suspension, and they were like taking it from point B to C, but they were not mentioning A. So I'm going to start from the beginning. I'm going to do an overcap. I'm going to discuss it, lay it out clear, and try to do the whole thing on a time which is rather normal, let's say, and don't take too much of your time. And we're back. So Let me explain a little bit before we go into the details of each one, what is suspension made up of and how does it work, what are the components we're going to discuss, and get a little bit familiarized, let's say, with the terminology. So the suspension involves is made up, let's say, between the front forks and the back shock. So the rear shock, which is this one here, it basically consists of a cylindrical component which houses many other smaller parts, let's say, including some usually oil related sort of let's say liquid. It has a spring and it has a couple of settings depending on whether your suspension is let's say configurable or not. And the front are the two big cylinders which is on either one side or either side of the tire. So that's what the suspension is made up from. Now, what's the purpose of the suspension? The suspension's main purpose is to keep you on the road and provide you the feedback, the traction and the responsiveness that you're looking for. Are there multiple settings and behaviors? Yes, there are. It depends on what you're aiming, what is your purpose, whether you're going to take the bike on the track or on the road. And depending on where you're going to take the bike, that's accordingly how you set up your suspension. If you're more of a hardcore, let's say, driver, you might want to set up your suspension to be a little bit more aggressive, which is going to give you a little bit more control, let's say, performance. But it does not take into account holes, puddles and stuff which you can encounter on the road. In Greece, unfortunately, we don't have the best roads. There's a lot of holes and everything, bad thing is, so you're looking for not to be so much, let's say, aggressive. You might lose a little bit on the performance, but you're going to get a lot more comfort. So that's the purpose of the suspension, let's say. It is a complex, let's say, system, and many times people listening to this information they get discouraged and they say it's too complex. I'm not going to go into the process of configuring this for myself, but it is something that you can do. Obviously, I recommend that everybody gets the service manual of their motorcycle and try to go by the book, let's say, in order for you not to cause any issues. I will try to explain as we go through the process. It is quite a bit of a technical thing, let's say, and it's not so much for new riders. So if you ask me, I just bought my bike, it's been a month, I will say don't worry about your suspension, you know what I mean? Not that there's no point for you to worry, but usually as per factory settings it does cover a huge, let's say, average, both on body weights, body let's say styles, and you know, it keeps it within the limits, let's say, unless you have a second-hand bike, where in that cases I will say, even if you are a new rider or not, that do take it to your mechanic and just get it checked. If you don't want to go into the process of, like, you know, reading up on all the things. But it is something that you can do also. And take me for an example, which I never got into the process of suspension, but reading a little bit about it, understanding it, driving a little bit on the bike and seeing how it behaves kind of made me understand that, oh yeah, I get it, this does this, oh yeah, I get it, this does that. So you might need to experiment a little bit, but don't be disencouraged. You know what I mean? You can't do it. It's not nuclear physics. It's just suspension on your bike. Okay, so we explained the purpose of the suspension. Now we're going to get a little bit, I'm going to explain a little bit the terminology, because you might hear a lot of these things and it might be confusing, as it was to me also. So, what are some of the terminologies? Sorry for the smoke. It helps me think better. I do not advocate and I do not promote smoking, by no means. It's not good for you. This is my weakness. Okay, so let's talk about the different components. We said the front forks, the two cylinders, and the rear shock, which is this component here. Okay. Depending whether they can be adjusted or not, there are a couple of things that I'm going to mention. The first thing, and I'm going to start from the simplest to the more complex, let's say. The first thing is the preload, your spring tension. The spring here has a preload. It is already compressed and it has stored energy. Okay, that's called the preload. And the preload will determine the sag or the static sag. What does sag mean? Sag means if you sit on your bike, how much is the distance that it's going to travel down? What's that distance? That's called the sag. A static sag, if you listen to it, is, let's say I pull on my bike. I pull on my bike as it is upwards. Is the top moving at all without me sitting on it? The bike should always have a little bit of place to move up a bit. You know what I mean? So if you lift the rear and it's stiff, it means there's no sag. It means the spring it has a lot of preload and the spring has topped out. You know what I mean? That does not give you room. Let's say you go over a bump and there's no room for you to do that. The back wheel is going to come off the ground because there's no sag. So you have to have a little bit of static sag. You have to have a little bit of room to pull the bike up. Obviously I can't do it now, you have to be standing up. A little bit of static sag. And then once you see that you do have a little bit of static sag, you play around with the actual sag, which means you take a measurement from a specific point to a specific point, and you see with somebody sitting on the bike what the measurements are, and you adjust it accordingly to fit your body type, your weight obviously, and your bike, okay, and your preferences. You know what I mean? You can go a little bit, there's a playing sort of, there's a margin there, you know what I mean? You can go a little bit more aggressive, more stiff, a little bit more relaxed, more soft, okay? You gain something, you lose something. So that's the first thing, that's talking about sag. The second thing is rebound. Now what does rebound mean? I'll try to keep it as simple as possible. Like I said, rebound is how much does it rebound. It's simple, okay, rebound. So once you have a spring and you go over a pothole, it will rebound, okay? It will go upwards, it will squish, and then it will go upwards and downwards. What you're trying to do is, you want to rebound, the perfect setting, let's say, to do this. As it squashes down, you want it to go quickly, back up, and stay there. It's never going to stay there. It's always going to do kind of a motion, but this motion should be as little as possible. So you don't want it to do this. That's not good rebound. You want it to go up quickly and to sort of stay there, maybe a little bit. Also, you don't want it to go slow. So if you push the bike down and it goes, it means it's very stiff. You don't have good rebound. If it goes quick and starts doing that, it's too light. So you gotta set it up just right. For the rebound, you don't need somebody on the bike, but you do need a couple of people around you to help you keep the bike upright and test these things. I'll try to explain a little bit, but because I'm by myself, we're not going to set up the bike now. I've already set it up. I'm just going to explain a little bit and just to show you how you will do it. But you need somebody to help you with this also. And you need a couple of things like a tape measure to measure the distances. We'll go into the detail of each one of these things. And the last component that I'm going to mention is compression. Now compression is a little bit more complex, let's say, and it might be a little bit more difficult for you to find information on the internet or on YouTube. I'll try to explain it as best as I can. Compression is, as the word suggests, it is the compression and an additional compression component, let's say, that you're using onto your spring. So the preload is already how much squashed the spring is. A compression is how much that spring, how much that suspension is going to travel. Harder compression, it means less travel. So when you're, let's say, driving the bike and you press the brakes heavily, the suspension, the front forks are going to dive. What's the distance that they're going to dive? You know what I mean? If you have low compression, it's going to cover a bigger distance. You're going to use more of your suspension, let's say. If it's harder, so it's higher compression, it's going to travel less. So you're using less distance, think about it, of your suspension, both front and back. How does that affect you? Well, it does affect because it takes a little bit of the pressure outside of the spring. The spring already takes the pressure from the preload, but the compression additionally adds to this. So it is a good thing to fix the compression to where you would like it. The compression is a little bit more of a difficult thing because you have to test and trial, you know what I mean? Nobody can tell you exactly what the perfect compression is for you and for your likes. You have to take your bike out. Give me 1 second. As I was saying, the compression is a little bit more difficult to configure because you have to take your bike out on the road, on the track, wherever you are, you need to adjust it in order for you to get a perfect understanding of how the bike is behaving. What you're trying to accomplish is a balance between aggressive compression and comfortable compression. If you're going to use more of the suspension, you're going to get more of a relaxed feeling, let's say, and you're going to have bigger travel distances on your braking, on your turns, on the bumps, on many things. It's not just the brakes. I mean, on the accelerator as well. When you turn on the gas, how much is the back spring going to compress? What's the distance? You know what I mean? Usually, for performance, you're using a higher compression. So you're using less of the distance, let's say. It's more preloaded, if you want to call it in such a way. So that was an overview of the different components. I explained the terminology. It's three things. The sag and the static sag, you can configure it by yourself, and not by yourself. You can configure it in your garage with a friend. The rebound additionally with a friend always. There's a couple of measurements that you need to take. And the compression, you can configure it on the road. Usually what they do on the compression is they have a look at what the min and the maximum is, and they set it somewhere in the middle. And they make sure that the compression both on the front left fork and on the front right fork of the suspension is even. Sometimes you might get uneven, and that can cause problems. So you got to make sure that they are set up right, let's say. Now, in order for you to experiment with the compression, you do have to take it out. You have to see how it behaves on the bumps, under heavy acceleration. Is it pulling you a lot back? You know what I mean? How does it feel? How does the geometry of the bike feel? If you've got very low compression and you open up the gas and you're feeling as if the back of your bike is pushing, and you're feeling that your handlebars are getting lighter, which means it can cause tank wobbles, as I said previously, then the compression might be too low. You might need to stiffen it up. So it depends also how you drive. If you're a guy that kind of gets on the gas straight away, you might need a little bit of a harder compression. So the compression also is related to the geometry of the bike between the front and the back as you're braking, accelerating, including the bumps on the road. So that's an overall, let's say, description. Now we're going to get on each one of these parameters. So first of all is the sag, the static sag and the sag of the bike. How do you configure the sag? How do you configure the preload, and how do you measure the sag? There's an easy way and there's a hard way, let's say. The easy way is usually on the back side of the bike is to configure the static sag. So what you do is you straighten up the bike, you lift it up, and you see whether you can pull it up a little bit or not, as I mentioned. Where if you cannot pull it, then you decrease the preload on the spring. There's a specific thing that I'm going to show later on how do you decrease it, and you make the spring, let's say, tension softer in order for you to have a little bit of room play. The best way to actually measure the sag, let's say, is to actually sit on the bike, and this is why you will need somebody to help you. So you put the bike on the upright position. Somebody needs to sit on the bike with the gear, whatever, full gear, because it does make a roll on the weight. They have to straighten up the bike, they have to take their driving position, and then you measure the distance between this point and this point. Okay, you can pull a little bit down on the handlebars, you as a second person, in order for the bike to equilibrate, and then you measure the distance between this point and that point. You hold that, and we're going to call that, let's say, measurement B. Okay, then the second thing you do, again, you have the bike on upright position, and somebody needs to pull on the handlebars. So lift the bike as much as you can, so that the suspension, the front forks, are as much as expanded as possible. And then you measure that distance, and that distance, we'll call it distance A. Your sag is going to be A minus B. So let's say it was 100 centimeters and it was, let's say, 70 centimeters B. 100 minus 70 gives you 30. What you're trying to aim at by configuring the preload is have around 30 centimeters, and again, this can change depending on the track or road use. You're looking for around 30 millimeters on the back and around 35 on the front. I'm giving a ballpark. Some people say on the front it should be between 35 and 45, so it gives you a little bit more distance, let's say, to play around. Some people say it's between 30 and 35 on the back. I'm going to give one number to keep it like simple. 30 I would say for the back, 35 for the front. And in order for you to measure on the back component, again, you have to have somebody sit and you measure accordingly. So you pick a specific point. On the front side, I've chosen to go with this and this. On the back component, you can measure from the axle, let's say, to a stationary point, so the back of your tail. But you need to make sure that those 2 points of measurement are the same, so you get proper results. So that's how you let's say, measure the sag, and how you configure it depends on your bike. My bike has a screw at the front here, which is a little, let's say, flathead screw, and that is the outside, which is a hexagonal, and that is the preload. On the back of the suspension there is another sort of, let's say, circular screw that you turn, and there's a tool that Yamaha actually gives with your bike. So one of the things that you need to consider when we're talking about configuring your bike is, can it be configured? Some bikes you will go and you will see at the top here they have nothing. So then straight away you know that your front forks, your front suspension cannot be configured. It's as simple as that. Similar thing on the back. Some bikes don't have. Some more expensive, some more racing bikes, for example, they have more configuration, more things you can play around in your suspension. And the latest bikes that have easier, let's say, configurations. I'll give an example. On my one at the top, you can configure the preload, you can configure the rebound, and on the bottom side, there's 2 screws. You can configure the compression. Low speed compression, high speed compression. On other bikes you have the compression setting on top of here, so you will have sort of indications, and that's why initially I said, you know, you do need to have your service manual in order for you, or your user manual, in order for you to actually reference and make sure that you understand where is what. On the back suspension, as can be seen here, there is this sort of circle here. If it can be seen, there's a tool here where you can actually turn this, and if you have a look, there's like a stepping sort of gauge between there's little sort of steps. Turning this way or that way will increment as per stages the preload on the spring, and you're trying to turn that in order for you to adjust it how you want. If you pay attention here, you can have the compression up there. So it says compression. You got the you got the low speed and the high speed. That's what the L means, that's what the H means. So on compression, it's vice versa. On the front, it was at the bottom. Here on the rear, it's at the top. At the bottom side here, if you see that, I don't know if it can be seen, but there's a little hexagonal sort of screw. That is the rebound. So that's how you configure the rebound. So this is where you configure each one of these things. How do you configure it? And what does it mean to configure it by changing these settings? So let's talk about, first of all, the preload, so the sag. The sag is basically the spring tension. You might also call it as spring tension. Turning the back component, which on my bike is by steps, is going to preload the spring, and that is going to determine the distance that you have between sitting and not sitting on the bike. On the front, there is, on my bike at least, there's this hexagonal sort of adjuster at the top here. You turn it left, and there's a couple of lines on my bike which will tell you. Now my bike is on step 2. By unscrewing and heightening on the R6 2006 model the preload on the front, you're actually adding more preload. So the higher you see those lines, the more preload there is. It's kind of vice versa. On other bikes it might be different. Because I did have a look at the service manual, because I have downloaded the service manual for the R6, I have found all these things. Additionally, the compression at the bottom, you have a little sort of hexagonal key and a different key. So this is how you do all the things. Now, when you do the preload, you're going to get on the back, as I said, you're going to measure those things, and you're going to turn the big golden thing here, which is the preload, or the big sort of circle, to get it to be around 30 centimeters and around 30 millimeters and around 35 millimeters at the front. Then you know that you're good as far as sag goes. Once you're done with the sag, the second thing is to do the rebound. Now, in order for you to do the rebound, you have to have somebody sitting on the bike, let's say, or you can do it by yourself, but it's better to have 2 people. You need to For the front suspension, you need to straighten up the bike and you need to push the bike towards the direction of the forks. So not downwards, not forwards, towards the suspension. You got to hold the brake, push it and let it come up and see how it behaves. Usually what people do is, in order for them to perfectly adjust it, they turn these sort of the rebound settings. On my one, it's this screw in the middle. They turn it all the way to the left, and they do the same thing on the right hand side. So they turn it, they put it out. In order for you to understand how rebound works, I'll explain it in a different way. Think about having a hose with oil that passes through it. Sorry for the movements. And then you have a needle which goes inside this hole. Okay, the more inside the hole, the nail, let's say, the pin goes, the less flow of oil is going to be. So that you're going to have restricted flow of the oil. The more outside you leave it, the more free the flow of the oil is going to be. That's how you configure rebound. So that's what's happening inside the fork and inside the shock. You're basically playing around with the movement of the oil. Obviously, it's not just one pin inside a hole. There's different holes and there's different restrictive components. But this is what you're doing when you're actually turning that key. You know what I mean? You're restricting the flow and you're unrestricting the flow. The more you unrestrict it, so the further out you spin it top, the more loose the bike is going to be. You're going to get on the bike, you're going to push it, and you're going to see that it's going to go down and it's going to come up and it's going to play around. You don't want that. Then you start screwing it. On my bike, I think 7 clicks. When you say clicks, is sometimes when you turn this, there's a clicking sound. Some of them you measure it by rotations. Some of them you measure them by faces, meaning edges on these sort of hexagonal things, and some of them by clicks. When you're turning the screw, you can actually feel a click. So you say 1 click, 2 click, 3 clicks. On my one, it's 7 clicks from out. Okay, which means from a fully out position, 7 clicks towards the right, and that's where it is. Same on the other side. So that's how you actually configure it. You test it again. You push on it. Is it coming up and stopping? Is it coming up quickly, and there's a lot of play? Tighten it more. Is it coming up, but it's coming up slow? So is it doing this movement? If it's doing that, then you pushed it way too much in. There's not enough flow of the oil in order for it to come up. So you're restricting it a lot. You need to get this right. So you take a couple of clicks out, 1 click out. You test it. Is it coming up quick? You're aiming for it to come up quick and not to have a lot of free play. And the same thing goes for the back. So again, you have the bike on upright position. You push downwards on the back of the bike and you have a look at the behavior. You go to the bottom side of the back of the rear shock and you configure again the rebound. The rebound is very, very important, and one of the things, if you're going to play around with this and your bike has adjustable, first of all, suspension, I will say pay attention when you go to the end. So when you're fully out or fully in, not to push additional. You can really damage the shocks. So that's a warning to people that are going to configure this by themselves. Make sure, on my suspension, for example, when you turn the key, there's a click. So when you turn it all the way out, let's say on the left, so you can turn it all the way to the clicks. You will hear the clicks. At some point, you're going to feel resistance. As soon as you feel resistance, stop pushing. If you push more, you can actually damage your forks, the internal components of your forks. So that's one warning to keep in mind. Again, I don't want to scare anybody, but there are some things that you got to pay attention to. So that's as far as the rebound. So we've set up the sag as per body type and weight. We've set the rebound, so we know that the rebound is coming properly. And then we go to the compression. The compression is, again, as I said, going to be tested on the road, and you're going to get the feel of it. So at the moment, I cannot explain how you can do it. It really depends. So you let's say, unwind the compression all the way to the left. Let's say there's 10 stages or 10 clicks, you put it on click 5. You put it in the middle, let's say. So you're in between. Then you take your bike out and you ride it. And another thing to mention here, which is very important, all these things you can do in a garage with a friend, fair enough. But keep in mind that you're playing around with suspension. You're playing around with something that has oil. You're playing around with something that has a fluid. Fluid temperature plays a huge role on how your suspension is going to behave. If you set up your bike and you've done it on a cold weather in your garage, and then you take it outside and you do heavy riding, it's not going to be the proper measurement, because the oil is going to get thinner, it's going to travel a lot more, and whether you have set it up and you think you've set it up correctly, it's not going to be correct. So usually that's why people take their bikes on tracks, or they take it on a parking lot with a friend. They drive it around, they push the brakes, they turn on the gas, they get the oil warmed up, and then with their friend they adjust it. That is going to be the perfect way to get the proper results. Okay, that's about it, guys. I would like to thank everybody for your time. I hope you enjoyed the video. Like I said, it is more of a topic that has a lot more information. If I did miss out something, I'll try to put it on the comments of the video or on the description. I might put some overlays with some numbers and stuff. I don't want to make it too complex, too technical. Simultaneously try to keep it as simple as possible, but there is a lot of information and you need to understand these components. You need to understand what sag does, you need to understand how it behaves, you need to understand what the rebound does, you need to understand what the compression does, which assists the preload of the spring, the distance that the suspension travels, why do you need to worry about the distance, and all these things play a role on making your life on the bike easier and best to what is suited for you. One thing that I did see, and I'll mention it before we close the video, for a guy that was actually testing the compression on his bike, he used zip ties. So he put zip ties at the top component here on his suspension, a zip tie around, relatively tight, not too tight, on both sides, and he took his bike out for a ride. After taking his bike out for a ride, by heavy pressing the brakes and doing all these things, he found out how much the distance of the compression, the high speed and the low speed compression on his bike was. And then he modified it. Again, he moved the zip tie and he saw how far down. He marked it on the actual fork with a line, and he figured out how much the travel was. So that's another hint that I did like his idea, you know what I mean. On the rear shock, I have not found something on how you can actually measure, but on the front one, as far as the distance of the compression, you can actually measure it with the zip tie. So that's a good idea if somebody wants to go out and try it. I have not tried it, like I said, and like I said, I'm not the expert. My suspension has been configured as per my mechanic because he actually fixed my suspension, and I did go back and forward to him after driving it and let him know that it feels a little bit like that. Can you sort of do it like this? Can you do it like that? And he actually, you know, told me all these things. So one of the things, for example, that I noticed on my bike is that I would have liked a little bit less preload on the front side. So he did that on my bike, and it seemed as if the geometry and a little bit, how can I say, a little bit less compression on the front. It felt as if the geometry when I was driving around, just to give an understanding of all these things that we discussed now are good, but how does that feel to you? Basically, I went to my mechanic and I told him that, you know, when I'm accelerating, the front feels very stiff. It feels very it feels as if it wheelies, so the front tire sort of lifts up easier. Can we change that? So what the mechanic did is he basically he added more compression on the front. Now, did he add the low speed or the high speed? I'm not sure. Like I said, I'm not the expert. He added more compression, and that kind of made my bike feel as if, not exactly, but as if he was sitting lower. So I'm presuming he might have sort of let out a little bit of preload on the spring to actually drop it a little bit, and possibly added more compression so it doesn't move a lot. So when I'm accelerating quickly, it doesn't uncompress, let's say, a lot. But that overall gave me a feeling on the road of more aggressive, as if my bike was more geometry-wise facing forward. And when I was heavy accelerating, it wasn't as light. You know what I mean? So all these things I'm just trying to explain do play a huge role on what it feels like. You know what I mean? And if you know nothing about it, then at least you can actually tell your mechanic, this is what it feels like to me. Can you fix it? You know what I mean? But at least when you go to your mechanic and you talk about these things, or if he tells you, you know, I did set it up, you can ask him. You can tell him, you know, what did you do? And he will turn around and say, I did this and this and this. So it is important to at least know what's going on in your bike, if for no other reason, just for the fact of actually understanding how things work. Anyway, I'd like to thank everybody. The sun has gone down. It's going to get darker soon. I'd like to thank everybody. I hope you have a good afternoon. And like I said, if you want anything else, or you want some more information, or even if you've seen that I stated something differently, sometimes I might forget to say things, sometimes I might misspeak and I might say the opposite of what I wanted to say. So, you know, like I said, we're human, we make mistakes. Leave a comment at the bottom and I'll correct it. Yeah, I'll address it. I'll say, yeah guys, I meant this, that, there, or for whatever reason. Like, subscribe, follow on the channel, and I hope you like the video. I'll bid you goodbye. We'll talk soon. Bye bye.